33 years ago, a little 6-year-old girl was hit by a truck and killed in a vehicular homicide case. Well, what happened was a group of 5 children went out at nighttime in their neighborhood and walked along the side of the street where there were no sidewalks. And as the 5 children approached the puddle that always formed when it rained, little 6-year-old Nicole Ray Walker wanted to be picked up, and one of the children picked her up and placed her on her hip as they waded through the puddle. A truck came down the road, veered off into the puddle, and struck the 5 children, hitting 3 of them and killing the little 6-year-old girl. This case was a tremendous impact on me because I was a father, and I really felt very strongly that this child's life was taken from her by a criminal act. And I felt as a prosecutor, I could seek justice for this little girl, and it was important for me to do everything I could to show a jury all of the evidence in the best light that would communicate to them what had happened here and why the person that I was charging with the crime was in fact guilty. In the age of television and movies, where camera angles are constantly changing every few seconds, we needed a dynamic piece of evidence that could really touch the jury and have them fully understand the impact of the evidence. And so I felt, why not do a cartoon in court? Why not do something that we ended up calling computer forensic animation? Computer animation had never been done before in the state of Florida, and maybe only a few other times somewhere else in the United States.
So every day was a learning experience for us as well. Nobody else had done this that had been recorded in any sort of detail in the country before.
This was a brand new piece of technology, and it was going to be a case of first impression for a judge here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
The process of creating an animation for the courtroom is not simple.
The process of a forensic animation starts with usually an expert.
We always had the use of experts in court, and experts are entitled to give opinions. And so in this case, we used the Broward Sheriff's detective who came up with an expert reconstruction opinion.
We will get data, information, usually just like hard numbers and facts, measurements.
And once we had that opinion, now we place that opinion in a visual form.
A scene will be created, and then we will go through different stages. Through multiple proofs, we will get as close as we can, getting towards the end result, to where the client is happy with that, and it provides them with a useful tool to show the jury kind of what happened in a way that the jury can understand. We work with experts and lawyers to create an accurate depiction by using evidence from the expert, eyewitness statements, and then with all that put together, it creates what happened there based upon that.
There were many obstacles. One of them was the legal obstacle. Could we convince a judge that this type of evidence was not unfair or unduly prejudicial, that it was a reasonable demonstrative aid to help a jury understand the evidence in the case?
Besides timelines, deadlines, there is certain evidence that has to be put forth, and we have to, instead of doing whatever you think might be true or what happened, we have to use the guidelines from what we're given in terms of evidence and measurements and stuff, information from the experts.
To overcome the roadblocks, you need to be well prepared. In Florida, we used the main case, the first case in Florida allowing animation, which is the case that I did in 1991. So when I go into court, I have the unique experience of arguing to a judge in present time a case, the first case that I did in 1991 with the little girl that was hit and killed in a terrible hit-and-run collision. What the animation brought to the table was a very impactful item that helped synthesize, put together many pieces of evidence all in one moving diagram. And what this animation helped me do as a prosecutor back in 1991 when we had this trial was to present a cohesive form of evidence that had such an amazing impact on this jury. It absolutely was a significant reason why the jury came back with a verdict of guilty of manslaughter.
The reality of what had occurred is much, much greater than just simply looking at photos or stills or drawings or hearing testimony from someone on the stand.
Animation brings to the table something that's different from, let's say, like a poster or an exhibit that's just a photograph or a document.
It demonstrates to the jurors some reality that they cannot see just in words alone.
It gives the opportunity to show something moving, to show more ways to demonstrate how something happened. Instead of showing a couple of photographs of a scene, we're actually going to the scene, moving with the camera around, or actually seeing a vehicle or a person walk by. It gives somebody more of an opportunity to understand what happened.
And this gets back to that, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, how many, words is 30 pictures a second worth?
The impact was amazing and tremendous. The only way to describe it is that you could hear a pin drop in that courtroom, and every second that that jury watched that animation, I can tell from looking at their faces that they were glued to that television as that animation was presented in front of them, taking together many, many, many pieces of evidence and putting them all together in a moving diagram that totally brought together the evidence for the jury to understand what happened out there on that night in that puddle to that little 6-year-old girl. Well, the use of computer animation and its successful conclusion opened up a whole new realm, a whole new universe of being able to communicate with juries using moving pictures. And so a computer animation became something that was a very important tool. In many cases, I have since had the opportunity to represent people on.
The one case that we worked on together was regarding a vehicle that had another pedestrian. That was pretty interesting. So it was local, so we were able to go to the scene, take a lot of measurements, do multiple times using a vehicle and trying to reenact it in real life in the same scene. With those measurements, then we were able to take that into the computer and then pretty much make the whole scene again, and then reuse the data that we took there, and then to represent the statements and the evidence that was put forward towards Ken.
I've used computer animation in cases involving where 5 children and a mother were killed by a DUI driver in a horrible DUI manslaughter accident, where I was able to show the jury the impact of the vehicle and how various children were thrown from the vehicle. I've used computer animation where a little girl had been killed in a beating, and in that situation I was able to show the 35 different injuries to her body and have the jury understand where those injuries were located, the severity of those injuries, was able to peel back, in essence, skin and show bones and bone fractures and hematomas on the brain. So computer animation in my career, from the time I first used it in 1991, from that base till now in 2024, I have been able to use animation and keep using the technology in enhancing and having more and more detail and better clarity, and have a better understanding for the jury of what the evidence in a case is. The continued use of animation in my cases has taught me that there is an impactful way that I can persuade a jury. It's all about a trial lawyer taking the evidence and being able to persuade the jury, having the jury understand the evidence and put it together so that they can have a complete picture and come to the proper verdict. And now I am attempting to use computer animation to the next level by putting virtual reality goggles on a jury and on a judge and allowing them to see, as if they're actually there, present at the scene, the animation and different angles of that animation using those VR goggles. I continue to innovate in ways such as taking computer animation to the next level and putting VR goggles on a jury so they, in virtual reality, can see a crime scene.
The advantages of VR in the courtroom gives the jury member, specifically individually, a way to go into that scene, to walk around, to be there. Instead of looking at a screen across the room, they're more immersed into the scene. They give an understanding of maybe some more emotions or what happened at that time.
It gives the jurors more of a feeling, more of an honest perspective of what did or didn't occur at a scene.
The goal of using animation in the courtroom and using virtual reality goggles on a jury is to help the jury understand the evidence. Animation and virtual reality is a tool, a powerful tool that is extremely helpful in this regard. It helps trial lawyers have the jury completely understand the evidence and be able to persuade them and get to the proper verdict.
Working with VR is similar in certain things, but instead of making what's right in front of you, we pretty much have to make a whole room. So that gives the viewer the opportunity to look around and be in the scene itself. Whereas a flat screen, you're just doing whatever the camera's going to be seeing. It's a little more work, but in the end, it gives a realistic vision of what an eyewitness or something like that saw there at the scene. And I think in the end, it gives the viewer more of an understanding of what happened.
Well, one of the obstacles is it's an expensive process.
You're talking about a significant investment.
Not every client and not every person charged with a crime has the ability to afford and the resources to afford hiring a computer animator, hiring an expert, and having all the time and energy necessary to produce an appropriate forensic computer animation. I hope for the future for computer animation in the courtroom in that it becomes more and more readily available to trial lawyers, that the costs come down and that judges become more and more familiar with the law and the understanding that just like any other piece of evidence in the courtroom, it has its place and it is appropriate in many circumstances to help a lawyer project to the jury the evidence in the case so that they can have a full appreciation of that evidence and get to the proper verdict. I hope for the future for computer animation in the courtroom in that it becomes more and more readily available to trial lawyers, that the costs come down and that judges become more and more familiar with the law and the understanding that just like any other piece of evidence in the courtroom, it has its place and it is appropriate in many circumstances to help a lawyer project to the jury the evidence in the case so that they can have a full appreciation of that evidence and get to the proper verdict. So I'm motivated to continue to use virtual reality and computer animation because it aids me. It's one factor and one piece of evidence that helps me arrive at justice for my client. So I'm motivated to seek justice, and using VR, using virtual reality and computer animation helps me achieve justice in jury trials and cases in court. So the future is very bright for technology to be very, very helpful in helping trial lawyers communicate to the jury the evidence in the case. And I think it's going to have a tremendous impact as we progress into the future and look to see judges and courts allowing this type of evidence in the future.